They're pretending to be concerned about COVID if you're wearing a mask on a plane. I flew on a plane recently. I mean, there were 50 announcements saying we had to wear masks. Did they require someone to wear a mask to cross the border? Of course not. Did they do COVID testing for everyone? Of course not. In fact, the reports are they're releasing folks they know have COVID into the population without telling anyone. First up, I want to talk about the border crisis caused by the change in policies by the Biden administration. Practically speaking, we have an open border if you are a underage person crossing the border illegally, or you're part of a family unit crossing the border illegally. You get in and you get released ultimately. That's the way it's looking. And the Biden administration is in crisis mode is because they're, quote, processing these folks, and the numbers are overwhelming the system. Now, they're not doing anything to curtail the transit of illegal border crossing. In fact, they're encouraging it by releasing those who get across the border. Now, prior to this, you had a crisis in 2019, and the Trump administration, to its really patriotic credit, because the president did what presidents are supposed to do in terms of preserving our Republican form of government and protecting our sovereignty and border. He reformed the asylum system, and he made it clear to the countries that were sending illegal immigrants up here that would not be tolerated anymore. And so, as a result, that if you wanted to seek asylum, and there are credible claims of asylum, it's not to say you can't have asylum, but you just can't come here, claim asylum, and then abuse the process in the sense that you get automatically released and you never show up for your asylum hearing. And that's the end of the matter. And President Trump largely curtailed that by requiring individuals to apply for asylum in Mexico. And, my understanding is many of those who applied for, once they figured out that was the case, they ended up going home. And they had a much more aggressive analysis of asylum claims that resulted in more rejections of fraudulent claims. And of course, the left likes to pretend that if you want to enforce the law on asylum, you're against asylum. No, in fact, when you enforce the law on asylum, credible asylum claims are handled expeditiously. And those who need them get them handled quickly. And those who are abusing the system similarly get quickly, and ought to quickly get drummed out of the system after due consideration. But Biden blew all that up because of its extreme open borders agenda, and now we have an open borders crisis in Texas and elsewhere on the border. They're talking about housing thousands of illegal alien border crossers. Well, I don't know if they're technically illegal in the sense children who cross the border are treated differently legally. So, in effect, they're encouraging the cartels and the human smuggling operations, the trafficking operations, to ramp up again. And they're going to, as I said, house potentially thousands of teenage males. And of course, any male who crosses the border who is not a teenager is going to say they're a teenager, so they can get the benefit of essentially what is Biden's amnesty, practically speaking. I've already told you they're trying to curtail interior enforcement, and they're practically speaking shutting down enforcement at the border. And of course, when you're rushing the border with thousands of illegal aliens, that it provides a nice distraction for the cartels who want to rush the border with other illegal items they need to traffic into the United States. So it's a rule of law crisis, it's a sovereignty crisis, it's a national security crisis. Judicial Watch has been in the forefront of highlighting the national security threats caused by our open border on the south there. And of course, it's a public health crisis because they're not They're pretending to be concerned about COVID if you're wearing a mask on a plane. I flew on a plane recently. I mean, there were 50 announcements saying we had to wear masks. Did they require someone to wear a mask to cross the border? Of course not. Did they do COVID testing for everyone? Of course not. In fact, the reports are they're releasing folks they know have COVID into the population without telling anyone. So this is the Biden administration, and it's purely the fault of the Biden administration. This isn't something he inherited and it just got a little worse. He came in and changed policies. And this is the result. It's a border crisis. He's failing to do his core duty as the president of the United States, A, to enforce the law, faithfully execute them, and secure our border and secure our sovereignty. I mean, if you want to talk about impeachment, and I encourage you to watch my speech I gave a few weeks ago, where I talked about this issue. If you're talking about impeachment, that's the sort of thing you impeach presidents over, in my view. Now, what is Judicial Watch doing? Well, first of all, we are challenging the welcome mats in jurisdictions, the sanctuary policies that encourage illegal aliens to A, go to those places, and then B, harm the public safety by allowing illegal alien criminals, folks who are not only illegal aliens, but go on to commit additional crimes here in the United States that harm the public safety, to get out. So we got two big cases in San Francisco and one in Santa Clara County, which is just south of San Francisco, challenging those sanctuary policies. And we're still pursuing a case in Maryland that's on appeal. These are taxpayer standing lawsuits where the theory is that taxpayers have a right to make sure their funds at the state level aren't being used to engage in illegal behavior or support engage in activities that violate the law. Now, separately with the border crisis, we've initiated a series of Freedom of Information Act requests. You may have seen recently news that the Biden administration is walling off any reporters from getting into these new caged facilities, as I call them. In fact, the new Secretary of Homeland Security, Mayorkas, is going down on a, quote, private CODEL, congressional delegation trip, Republicans and Democrats, senators going down with them to look at the border. Private. I don't know which Republicans are on that trip, but I wouldn't be part of that scam. Supposedly it's private because of privacy concerns and COVID-19. So now the big government and the Biden administration is using COVID-19 to cover up their activities that aid and abet illegal activity on the border. Because when you, by the way, are taking kids that you know have been trafficked there, and after filing some paperwork, move them to another location, you're part of the human trafficking operation. You're part of child smuggling. That's the rule of law crisis I'm talking about. I mean, all the news today is about, I'm sure you've seen Biden tripping 2 or 3 times going up the stairs in Air Force One. And I've highlighted to you before my concerns about his cognitive issues. And, I'm concerned he's suffering cognitive disabilities that are impacting his ability to do his job. But because we're supposed to pretend that's not an issue, we're still going to hold him fully accountable for failing to do his job because he has no excuse, we're told. I mean, he within a month, I mean, we're into month 2 now. I mean, the border broke down within a month of his coming into office after he undid all of those Trump-era reforms. I mean, if Biden were smart, he'd bring in President Trump and have him as a volunteer border czar. We know what happened. He'd get it done. But of course, there's this crazed anti-Trump crazed left-wing extremism policy that's coming out of Washington, D.C., now with the new Biden administration. And, as a conservative, I object to the policies, and I'm sure you do too. But as president of Judicial Watch, in my experience, extreme left policies often run afoul of the law. And in the case of immigration, it almost always runs afoul of the law because it usually means A, not enforcing the law or actively violating it. So we've got lawsuits already on this illegal immigration crisis. More lawsuits will be coming up. But I'm telling you, if you are concerned about this, you've got to let your members of Congress know. You've got to be active locally because all of these aliens, they're not staying in Texas. They're coming to your town. As I said, the health crisis, the public safety crisis, I'm sure all of the Central American centered gangs like MS-13, et cetera, are going to be all excited because they're going to get an influx of new members as a result of these young men coming in with the help of the Biden administration. This is a nightmare. And if I were the governor of Texas and other border states, I'd look into that constitutional provision that allows states to engage in a compact to protect themselves against an invasion. How many thousands of illegal aliens constitute an invasion? Our border needs to be secure. If we don't have a border, we don't have a country. So it would be nearly impossible to overstate the importance of border security. Now, the revolutionary left that's in ascendance here in Washington, D.C., hate the United States, want to end the country, want to end our Constitution. So it should be no surprise to you that they want to end our borders. But Joe Biden has pretended he's not a man of the communist left. So he needs to be accountable for enforcing the rule of law. And every Republican and every honest Democrat on the Hill, they need to be shouting from the mountaintops about this. They really do.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.